Welcome back. In this video we're going to make the second Lego part, which is the right angle beam. To start off, open SolidWorks and open a new part. And as before with the first part, it doesn't really matter which plane you start on. In this case I'm going to start on the front plane again, so choose the front plane and then select sketch from the menu that pops up. Now if we look at the beam part, we can see it's basically made out of 3 rectangles that are at different angles to each other and the ends of those are rounded. So we can use the slot tool to draw this basic shape. So from within your sketch, let's go up to the sketch tab and choose the slot tool. And we want to choose the first option, which is a straight slot. We can see on the tool as usual, you've got these little numbers on the icon and they show you what each click does within the tool. So number 1 sets the left hand side of the slot, number 2 sets the right hand side, and then number 3 sets the size of the slot. So let's go into the graphics area and start at the origin with the first click. And then let's draw out a slot that goes to the right horizontally. Something roughly like this. That's going to be the bottom of our beam. We're now still within the slot tool. And let's start another slot at the center of this right hand point, going upwards and to the right at an angle. It doesn't have to be exactly the correct angle because we will add dimensions in a moment. So we'll go upwards, something roughly like this, and then finish that slot there. And then let's start a third and final slot that starts from the center point on the right here and goes directly upwards vertically. So you should have something like this, and then we can press escape to close the slot tool. Now the first thing that we're going to do is just select all 3 of these slots and make sure they're all the same diameter. So let's select the rounded edge of each slot in turn. So I'm going to select this one on the left, I'm going to hold down Control and then select this one in the middle, and then keeping Control held down, select this one on the right. And then release Control. And then from the menu that pops up, I'm going to choose Make Equal. That will make the radius of all of these 3 slots the same. So now we have a rough overall shape of the beam and we can start to set the exact size. So let's choose the Smart Dimension tool from the Sketch tab. And the height of that slot, from what we've measured with the calipers, we know is 7.4 millimeters. And so when we add that first dimension, it resizes the entire sketch to suit that dimension. Next, we want to set the length of the bottom of this beam. And to do this, we're going to count how many circles are in that bottom section. So if you look closely at the part, there's actually 7 different circles in that. We also know from measuring the circles that they're each 8 millimeters apart. And we know that the diameter of them is 4.8 millimeters. So I'm going to get the circle tool from the Sketch tab, and I'm going to draw a circle here on the left-hand side of our part. It's lined up with the origin, which means it's also concentric with that curved part at the end of the slot. Then I'm going to use the Smart Dimension tool to set the diameter here to 4.8. So we've got the first circle that we need there on the left. We know that there's 7 of those and they're spaced 8 millimeters apart. So we can pattern some more of those circles along to set the exact size of this beam. Press Escape to make sure you're not in the Smart Dimension tool still, and then left click to select that circle. Then I'm going to go to Linear Sketch Pattern, which is on the Sketch tab. We can now pattern this circle along. So we know we need 7 instances. So I'm going to increase the number of instances to 7. And we also know that the spacing is 8 millimeters. So I'm going to set that here as 8 millimeters. Now, if you don't see a yellow preview like this, just make sure you have that circle selected in the Entities to Pattern box. And then make sure you also have a direction selected in direction 1. You might just need to click in that box and choose one of the straight lines going in the X direction. Now one last thing we need to do before we press OK, just put a check in this box that says Dimension X Spacing. This will just mean that that 8 millimeter spacing will be set when we create the pattern. And then when everything looks good, press OK to make that pattern. And now we can see we've got 7 of those circles and we've got that 8 millimeter spacing there. So all of those circles are black because they're fully defined. So what we can do now is grab this end point of the lower slot. You might have to zoom in a bit to be able to see it. So grab that and left click and drag it so it's lined up with that right hand circle. So the circular edge on the right hand side of that bottom slot should be concentric with that right hand circle. So what you can do is just drag that center point of the slot along and then hover over the edge of that right hand circle, and then you should be able to see the center point of the circle. You can then move the center point of the slot back to the center point of the circle and release it, and that should link it there. So now we know that that lower beam is the correct length. Next, we can move these other sections around a bit. Firstly, let's just move this down a bit, and then let's get the Smart Dimension tool, and let's add an angle in there. This is 135 degrees. Now we can set the length of these two extra slots. So again, let's select the circle tool, and we know that this vertical section has got 3 holes in it. So use the circle tool to draw one circle here at the top, another circle here at the bottom of the vertical section, and then a third circle in the middle of that vertical section. So it should be coincident with the midpoint of that center line that goes down the middle of the slot. Then we can select all 3 of those circles. So remember, hold down Control to select multiple items, then just left click to select those 3 circles, and then keeping Control held down, let's also select one of those other circles that we've already defined. Then release Control and just choose Make Equal. That will make those 3 circles on the right hand side the same diameter as all of the other circles. We can then just set the distance between the holes. So use the Smart Dimension tool and choose, for example, the top one and the center one, and set that to 8 millimeters, that standard distance there. So then the final thing we need to do is just add that slot in the middle of that diagonal section. To do this, we'll use the slot tool again. So choose the tool. This time, instead of a straight slot, we're going to use a center point slot. And that's the second option here. So this means that we're going to start from the center of the slot and we're going to move outwards and then set the size. And if we look at the numbers on the icon, we can see number 1, the first click, sets the center point of the slot. So let's zoom in a little bit. Let's start the slot from the center point of that diagonal section. And then we're going to drag the slot upwards, something like this. Set a rough length of the slot and then drag it outwards and then set a rough size. Then once you've got the slot in place, press Escape to close the slot tool, and then we can make sure the slot is the same diameter as those other circles. So select one of the circles, hold down Control, and also select one of the circular edges of the slot, and then choose Make Equal. So we know that slot's the correct size, but we can still move it around. If you're ever not sure why something's still blue, why it isn't fully defined, you can just left click and drag the points around, and that should give you an idea of what it needs to be fully defined. In this case, we need to use the Smart Dimension tool, and we need to set the correct spacing for the length of that slot. So that length there should be 8 millimeters. So that double slot is basically 2 holes that are joined together. So again, we're still not quite fully defined. So if I grab one of the points and move it around, you can see we just need to set the distance from the corner of that beam to the slot. So that should be 8 millimeters because the spacing between all of the holes is 8 millimeters. And that should fully define your sketch there. And if you find you're not fully defined, you might just need to add some further spacing between the holes to make sure all of the holes are 8 millimeters apart. And then the size of all of the holes should be 4.8 millimeters diameter. So that gives us the overall profile that we need to create that beam shape. And we can now use that to create an extrude of the beam. So staying within the sketch, let's go to the Features tab. Let's choose Extruded Boss Base. And then first, let's set the width of this beam. So we know that's 7.85. Let's change it from blind to mid-plane so that our plane is down the middle of the beam. This will just make things easier when we need to mirror some features later on. Then let's click in the Selected Contours box and let's choose the areas of the profile that we want to extrude. So we're just going to select those gaps in the beam area so it looks something like this. And as well as that main beam shape, we also want to choose the last and the first circle. That's because if we look at the real part, these first and last circles are actually cross-shaped so they can fit in the axle part. So we're going to cut those separately. Then press OK, and now we've created the start of our beam there. So you should have a shape something like this. Let's rename that first feature on the left by doing a slow double click on it, or selecting and pressing F2. And I'm going to call that beam. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you've probably seen that I like to rename a lot of features. You don't have to do this, but it can save you a lot of time in the long run just by making your model a little bit more organized and easy to understand. Now that we've made the basic beam shape, we're going to cut those cross sections out where the axles will fit in. So I'm going to start another sketch on the front plane. And let's start with the left-hand one down here. So firstly, get the circle tool, draw a circle at the origin, so it's concentric with that rounded edge of the end of the beam. This circle is the same diameter as the others, so use the Smart Dimension to set that as 4.8 millimeters. But we also know that it's got that cross shape to fit the axle in. So let's go to the rectangle tool, let's choose the center rectangle, and then let's draw 2 rectangles that make a rough cross shape like this. And then use Smart Dimension to set the width of one of those rectangles as 1.8. We can now use relations to fully define the rest of the sketch. So firstly, I'm going to select the small edge of one of those rectangles and then hold down Control and select the other small edge, and then make those the same length. So press Make Equal. So they should both be 1.8 millimeters. Then next, let's select one of those small lines, and then also select the circle and make those tangent, and then do the same for the other rectangle as well. At this point, you should have that cross shape with the slightly rounded edges, and it's basically the same profile that we used to create the axle in the last video. Now, if we look at the real part, there's actually also another area cut out here to the right hand side. To create this cutout area, first we're going to select that circular edge on the second circle there, and then go to the Sketch tab and choose Offset Entities. And we want to offset 1.3 millimeters outwards. So your circle should be exactly touching the edge of the beam there. If you find that your yellow preview circle is smaller than the edge you selected, you might just need to press reverse here on the left. Then press OK to offset that circular edge. Then we're also going to do the exact same thing for the first circle we drew. So select that circle on the left, go to the Offset Entities tool, and then offset 1.3 millimeters outwards. Then next we're going to select this upper straight edge of the beam. We're going to offset that 1 millimeter downwards. And we're going to do the same for the bottom edge of the beam. So select that straight edge on the bottom and then offset this 1 millimeter upwards. So we're building up a profile that we're going to cut out. Then finally, we just need to fill in a little gap here. So let's choose the line tool and let's add a small straight line going from the edge of this rectangle out to that circle there. And then the same on the bottom as well. So this looks like a fairly messy sketch, but we're going to cut out specific parts of it. And this will become more clear in a moment when we actually make the cut. Before we actually do make that cut, we need to make the same sketch on the right hand side for that final circle as well. So zoom out and basically follow the same process for this area on the right hand side. I'm going to do this one a little bit more quickly. So firstly, I'm going to get the circle tool. I'm going to draw a circle which is concentric with the end of the beam here and set that to 4.8 diameter. Then I'm going to use the center rectangle to create those two center rectangles. I'm going to set the size as 1.8. I'm going to make both small edges of the rectangle the same size by using the equal relation. And then I'm going to set the length of the rectangle by making those small edges tangent with the edge of the circle. Then if you remember, we used the Offset Entities tool to offset those circles 1.3 millimeters. You might need to choose them both separately and do two separate offsets. You might be able to choose them both and then do the offsets in one single go. Then again, we're going to select those straight edges on the outside of the beam and offset those 1 millimeters inwards, one on each side. And then finally, just use the line tool to add those two small lines to join that small cross part to the rest of the cutout. We're now ready to make those cutouts. So from still within the sketch, let's go to the Features tab and let's choose Extruded Cut. And then click down here in the Selected Contours box. So we want to choose these 5 sections of the cross. We also want to choose that extra small rectangle section, and then also that kind of wedge shaped section there. Then for the type of cut, instead of blind, let's go for through or both. This just means that you cut through the entire model in both directions. If we now zoom in and look at the preview, you can see we've got 2 small areas that we also need to cut. So we also need to select these 2 small wedge shaped sections, one on each side. And then when you've got everything, it should sort of look a bit like this, sort of like a gravestone on a half pipe almost. Then let's go to the other side and do the exact same thing. So we're going to choose these 5 sections of the cross, also that wedge shaped part, the small rectangle, and then those 2 small wedges. And when you're happy, press OK, and it should look something like this. So we've cut out that area for the axle on both sides, and I'm just going to rename that feature as Axle Cut. So the general shape of the part is complete there. If you're stopping at this point, you can save your part now. I called mine Corner Beam 7 by 4 by 3, just because it's 7 long by 4 by 3. And then I put that number on for the kit, which is 30465. If you're not stopping, you can just continue directly on to the next video, where we'll just finish off some small details of this part.